Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that background. Niharika, I'll request you move to the agenda for the report presentation. Great, thank you so much. So this is what we intend to cover from our report today, and I'll still encourage you to go to PLAN's website and download the report. So we are going to cover the background to gender-lens investing in Kenya, share some insights on women entrepreneurship in Kenya, enabling ecosystem for GLI, and look at the supply side of GLI in the country, as well as cover some of the market gaps and opportunities that we identified for GLI in Kenya. So moving on to the next slide. Great. So we adopted a mixed methods approach to our research, where we conducted secondary research and then engaged stakeholders in the ecosystem. We spoke to about 67 stakeholders through key informant interviews with investors, ecosystem intermediaries, and sector experts. We also had a survey that targeted women-owned and gender-inclusive businesses. Additionally, we had about 5 focus group discussions where we really sought to delve deep into the challenges facing women-owned and gender-inclusive businesses, as well as a focus group discussion really targeting solutioning and with both the enterprises as well as investors and other players. Next slide, Niharika. So globally, the business case for investing in women has been demonstrated. There's a lot of existing research that show the benefit for investing in women. So companies with about 20% and more women in management position and 25% more women in boards show higher share price returns than companies with less gender diverse leadership. Increase in women in leadership from 0% to 30% is associated with a 15% increase in profitability. Female-founded businesses deliver higher revenues, more than 2 times as much per dollar invested than the male counterparts, and women are 21% less likely than men to be negatively listed, as they are more risk-averse and conscious about default. So these are some of the insights that have come out from the research that has been undertaken to demonstrate the business case for investing in women. Looking at the global scene, we saw that GLI is really gaining momentum globally, with an estimated 206 GLI funds in 2021 compared to 58 funds in 2017, and this cumulatively deployed about 4.8 billion USD. GLI activity has also been shifting from the global north, where it was concentrated, with only 38% of the GLI funds targeting North America in 2020 compared to 80% in 2017. Sub-Saharan Africa was the second most preferred geography, with about 26 funds also aiming to invest in the region. Despite the growth in this asset class, however, women-owned and gender-inclusive businesses continue to attract only a minor share of the global investment, receiving only 2.3% of the global VC funding in 2020. And of course, as Charlotte has really set the context about the multiple financial and non-financial challenges that hinder women from attracting capital. On to the next slide. So from the survey that we undertook, we were able to collect information around the sources of capital and the annual capital needs of the respondents. So looking at the graphs, most women-owned as well as gender-inclusive businesses still get their funding mainly from retained earnings as well as family and friends. But we did see SMEs who mentioned that they also get funding from banks as well as PE and VC. Looking at the annual capital needs of the respondents, the largest proportion of the micro enterprises that we looked at really need annual capital needs of about 50,000 Kenya shillings, and the largest proportion of SMEs are looking for about 500,000 to 2.5 million Kenya shillings annually. On to the next slide. We sought to also understand the challenges that most women entrepreneurs, as well as gender inclusive, face while accessing capital. And one of the key challenges that was really highlighted was lack of collateral. As we understand the way the market is structured, most of the assets are not owned by women. So lack of collateral was really a major problem highlighted. The second one was lack of networks, where most of the women businesses, gender inclusive businesses, are not able to know where to go to look for funding. High cost of capital was also a major challenge, and inability to present financial forecast, as most of the businesses are not able to really do proper financial management. There was also limited knowledge of capital sources and gender bias. It was interesting where one of the enterprise mentioned that she was not able to attract funding until she brought in a male board member, and that's when she was eligible for bank funding. So it was really interesting to hear that in this day and in this day. On to the next slide. Great. So looking at women entrepreneurs, non-financial support needs. So most of the women and gender inclusive businesses highlighted strategic support for growth as a key need that they need in really knowing how to tap into new markets and new customer segments and how to build partnerships for market growth. Investor introduction was also a key area of need, as well as mentorship, technical assistance, and market linkages. Use of technology was also a key area highlighted, and lack of industry-specific training and peer networking, as well as incubation and childcare support. So we also sought to understand whether women have been able to access business support. So interestingly, close to 60% of those that we engaged mentioned that they have not attracted or rather have not been able to receive business support. But of those that have received, 68% mentioned that the business support is able to effectively meet their needs. The next slide. So we also looked at the GLI ecosystem enablers in Kenya, really looking at who is driving the growth. And we mapped about 40 organizations that are offering various forms of support, from networks and associations that were more in number. So these are platforms that are creating network and knowledge sharing opportunities for women and gender inclusive businesses. We also have accelerators that are supporting businesses, especially to attract commercial funding. There was also TA and BDS providers, as well as incubators and researchers and think tanks that have also emerged to build the knowledge base for GLI in Kenya. So looking at the supply of gender-lens investing in Kenya, so we built a database that included deals made between 2015 and June of 2021. And looking at these deals cumulatively, there was a deployment of about 285 million in 47 deals with an explicit gender lens between, and this was done by DFIs and private impact investors. There was an over 160% increase in the annual deployment between 2015 and 2020, as you'll see from the graph as well. And private impact investors accounted for nearly 75% of the deals and 16% of the total capital deployed. So we also mapped 50 deals totaling 246 million USD that were deployed with an intentional gender lens. And what we mean by this is those investors that don't have a mandate for gender in their operations, and they do not intentionally measure gender outcomes as part of their investments. So we have a couple of market gaps and opportunities that we present in the report. These are quite detailed in the report, and so I'll also just request that you go in and read to see what we put across, but I'll present this briefly. We identified about 10 market gaps and opportunities, and around 24 recommendations. So the first market gap that we saw was lack of commitment from limited partners on genderless investing. And we saw about 2 recommendations that come out from this market gap. One is advocating for policies that incentivize capital allocation for GLI. So there's a big role for government to come in and put in attractive policies that really motivate LPs and GPs to come to the space. The second one was developing gender-based incentive structures to increase the intentionality of LPs and GPs on gender impact. We saw a second gap around limited adoption of gender-sensitive investing processes. Some of the recommendations that we also put across in the report are: 1, to develop and implement innovative due diligence and credit assessment tools and processes to reduce unconscious gender bias. Secondly, to institute technical assistance programs for investors to enable them to move from intention to action on GLI. So what we saw is that while there are there are ecosystem support organizations that are supporting enterprises in the GLI space, we saw less focus of support to the investors, really to help them incorporate gender into their fundraising processes. The third one was developing and delivering a GLI fellowship program for fund managers. And the vision that we have with this is really building a champions for GLI through the fellowship program that will also equip the investors with the tools that they need to incorporate gender in their operations. The next one was increasing the number of female fund managers through gender inclusive fund management networks. We also saw a gap around lack of small ticket offering. So most of the funding went into deals that were above $150, while most of the enterprises that we were speaking to actually needed between $10,000 and $30,000 investment. So really having funds that target that kind of deal size is crucial to grow the GLI space. So our recommendations are around establishing a dedicated small ticket fund to invest in women-owned and gender-inclusive businesses. And secondly, partnering with financial technology companies to lower deal costs, since the cost of deals is one of the challenges that investors face when they are investing in small ticket sizes. So really looking at how technology companies can come in to lower that cost. Next. So the fourth gap was around misaligned investment instruments and terms, where the capital and the capital supply and demand side are mismatched in both the instruments and the terms. And the recommendations that we had around this was: 1, to design uncollateralized instruments to make debt more accessible for women entrepreneurs. As I have highlighted earlier, the lack of collateral is one of the challenges that hinder women from accessing capital. The second one was design alternative risk capital instruments. And the third one is designing instruments and terms based on women's specific needs and preferences. So really taking into consideration the needs that women highlight. The next one is lack of sufficient concessional capital for GLI. And the recommendations we've made around this is to advocate for more concessional financing for genderless investing. So really tapping into both traditional and non-traditional sources of finance, and particularly the local capital sources, the corporate foundations, as well as the individual and family, as well as family foundations. Then the next recommendation we had was around structuring blended capital vehicles to enable more flexible or concessionary instruments for women-owned and gender-inclusive businesses. So bringing different sources of capital to invest with a gender lens. The next one was lack of pre-investment, non-financial support. While there exists and investment support. This has focused really on enterprises that have already received financing or are in the process of receiving financing. So there's really a need to also offer that pre-investment TA that will help build a pipeline that can be invested into. The recommendation we had around this is creating gender-inclusive capacity building programs that prepare women-owned and gender-inclusive businesses to achieve investment readiness. Next slide. The second market gap that we identified was lack of gender-inclusive business support. And the recommendations we brought out around this are launching sector-specific GLI business support programs targeting women-owned businesses and gender-inclusive businesses. Second is building advisory support for enterprises to monitor and identify areas of gender impact across their value chains. The third one was providing ecosystem support organizations with results-based financing linked to the achievement of gender-related milestones. Just to add around this point is we realize that most GLI interventions, TA interventions have focused on women-owned businesses and gender-inclusive businesses, which are those that incorporate women as part of their supply chain or as their customers, really don't receive a lot of support. The eighth market gap was around lack of targeted skills building for women-owned and gender-inclusive businesses, and thus we saw a need to incorporate core skills training into business support programs, particularly around leadership development, team management, and development. The second one is around establishing secondment arrangements with corporates and investors. We saw an opportunity for gender inclusive and women-owned businesses to also learn from corporates and investors, and to also see how corporates and investors can support these businesses with talent through, for example, also seconding their staff as part of their CSR programs. Then we also saw a need to develop specialized talent acquisition services for early stage businesses. The next gap was around unsuitable sourcing channels and lack of gender-inclusive investment networking opportunities. And our recommendations are around developing investor networking facilitation for actors deploying GLI strategies. While there are a number of networking opportunities, these again have really focused around impact and do not bring the investors and entrepreneurs as well as other ecosystem support organizations in a way that is action-oriented for the sector. Then the second recommendation is around developing GLI-specific mentoring and peer networks. So data, especially aggregated GLI data and information is quite a challenge in the country. And the recommendations we had around this was we're collecting and tracking long-term performance data of women-owned and gender-inclusive businesses that can be also shared with the broader ecosystem. Secondly, was developing a knowledge hub for GLI information and resources that can be easily accessible by key stakeholders in the ecosystem. And thirdly, was developing a deal sharing platform that aggregates data on GLI deals and where different investors can go in and tap in and identify co-investment opportunities. So that's a summary of what is there in the report. We have a lot of insights, so I would encourage you to go in and to read more and to share your thoughts as well directly to us at Intellecap or to Plan International. Great. Over to you, Agnes.
Hi, thank you so much, Rachel, for that overview of the research that we carried out. We also want to thank all of the various entrepreneurs, investors, and intermediaries who are with us in this session today, who contributed so much to this report. We're really happy that it's out. We've posted the link in the chat session, and hopefully you can be able to review and give us your feedback and also ask questions related to it as we continue with the session. So without further ado, what we had hoped was to have a very engaging interaction after sharing some of the insights that we found in the market, including some of the financial and non-financial gaps in the market, the investment trends that we see from both private impact investors and other foreign impact investors. We also wanted to have the entrepreneurs speak. We talked to gender inclusive businesses. These are businesses that are creating products and services that are targeting women and girls. We also spoke to women businesses, so lots of women founders. We got feedback on what kind of businesses that they had. Some of this are in the small scale. The nature of the businesses tends to be small. They don't have a lot of huge ticket sizes when it comes to their asks for and capital needs, but then they also require financing, and financing is a requirement that's faced all across the various stages of businesses. We also spoke to medium and small enterprises who are operating in retail, who are also operating in manufacturing. They had a lot of insights to share on the challenges that they faced, specifically going to traditional financing institutions such as banks, requirements of collateral, the high interest rates that they're also sort of burdened with, and sometimes the gender bias as well. We also spoke to scaling businesses who we thought at that stage would have minimal challenges because they've sort of crossed some of the hurdles that early stage entrepreneurs will face. But as we understood, some of these challenges continue as you open up to VC and PE funding, and particularly as a female founder. So today we are very privileged to have three leading entrepreneurs, I would say. We have Emily Woods, we have Annabelle Ngwenyi, and we also have Sahar Jamal. So I'll give them 2 minutes each to please introduce themselves, and then we'll ask a few specific questions around their businesses. Annabelle, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Annabelle Ngwenyi. I am co-founder of Ziada. We just rebranded from Kazi app. And what we do is 3 things. We noticed the gaps that small-time business owners, a lot of them being women as well, face, and we're trying to plug those in. So one is market visibility, and we have a marketplace for that. The second one is we offer both a P2P service, as well as we own a couple of tools of the trade that we rent out to service providers. And third is business support. This is business advisory across a number of sectors, including tax, compliance, and HR. That's us. Thanks.
Thank you, Annabelle. Sahar?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sahar Jamal, and I'm the founder of Mozilla Breastfeeding. Just type in the chat if you can't hear me okay, because I heard my mic is not perfect. But Mozilla's vision is to ensure that no mother has to choose between breastfeeding her newborn baby and staying and going to work to support their family financially. And this was inspired by my experience working at Jacaranda Health, where we heard from hundreds of mothers, especially those who worked in the informal sector, that they were struggling to continue to exclusively breastfeed after returning to work postpartum. In fact, of the 1 million women who give birth every single year in Kenya, only 10% have managed to successfully balance breastfeeding and working. And as a result, their children are 14 times more likely to die than those who are optimally breastfed. So despite public policy like the Health Act of 2017, many workplaces don't have the lactation room for women to breastfeed and express their breast milk. And of course, many women who work in casual labor or informal settings, those maternal employment policies are not adhered to. So based on several years of user-centered research and development, we have developed the Wema breast pump, which is first of its kind in Africa. It is a discrete, portable and wireless breast pump that can allow women to express breast milk in any environment. And we have a network of community breastfeeding ambassadors that are a network of peer-to-peer lactation support consultants that disseminate breastfeeding education across Kenya. And we've been really fortunate to have great feedback on our pump so far. 94% of women that we've surveyed who've purchased our pump have been able to continue exclusively breastfeeding while returning to work. And our education sessions have been given a 9.7 out of 10 rating for their ability to inform and educate the participant. But of course, we've also faced a lot of challenges around fundraising and growth, especially during COVID. So definitely happy to talk about that and provide any advice to other entrepreneurs in the sector. Thanks.
Thank you, Sahar. Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Sanovation. Sanovation partners with government here in Kenya to develop and implement sustainable waste management services. Specifically, we focus on a waste to value solution in about 9 different cities here in Kenya. I think it's really important for this discussion to know that my co-founder is a male. So I've gotten to see a lot of very specific examples of counter of him and me doing fundraising.
Thank you so much for your overviews of the business. I think we'll go directly into some of the questions we had prepared to guide the conversation. And the first is, having explained your business models, I'd like to understand where you've received capital from. Maybe mention the stage at which your business is right now, how your fundraising journey has been, how you've received capital, who you approached, and what kind of capital you also received. I'll start with Sahar. Knowing that you have a very hybrid business and you're still in the early stage, I think you'll have very interesting insights.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to share. So we're currently post-revenue. We launched our product in around July, August of last year. Still definitely early stage. We've launched in Kenya and in South Africa so far. When we were pre-revenue, it was really challenging to raise money, but we were fortunate to raise primarily grant funding and non-dilutive capital from the Gates Foundation, Skoll Foundation, MIT Solve, and Northwestern University. And I think, while it was very slow and steady, we were able to be relatively successful in the end with our fundraising. As Agnes mentioned, we are hybrid, so we have a 501c3 in the US and we have a for-profit in Kenya. And that, I think, has been a big part of the, challenge around fundraising. While I think this is a pretty common structure, I don't think many funders, either in the impact investment space or the grant funding space, prefer to invest in that type of organization. We made the intentional decision to structure ourselves that way in order to prioritize impact as it relates to our target customer, our pricing, and our distribution strategy in order to prioritize impact as well as financial return. But I think a lot of non-Kenyan-based impact investors often hesitate to invest in a for-profit in Kenya that's associated with a nonprofit in the US. And in terms of grant funding, sometimes there's a bit of skepticism around the revenue generating side of our business, even though we believe that actually helps us be sustainable and a bit less reliant on grant funding in the long run. It's been difficult to find people who fit in that middle ground. And then, as mentioned in the report, obviously, some of the challenges that we've faced have been related to gender and, equitable representation in the deal room. If you can think about the fact that we are a very female-centric business run by women of color, a lot of the investors that I've been speaking with are often European or American, Caucasian men, and the support for breastfeeding in the developed world is still lacking. So having them try and envision the challenges that women who are low and middle income in Kenya might face in an informal environment of a workplace, it can be a bit of a stretch. And I just think better representation in the deal room might improve that. But we have been able to tap into a lot of gender lens investors and those that are focused on maternal and newborn health, and that's certainly helped us, as well as look at more creative blended financing options like rev share or inventory loans, recoverable grants, that sort of thing. Especially now that we're post-revenue, it's opened up a lot more open opportunities for us.
Great. Sahar, I love that you already covered 4 or 5 of my other questions in just that one question. So great job. No. Before we move on, I'd just like for you to maybe explain a bit more to the audience, because we're talking a lot about innovative types of finance. What are recoverable grants?
So one that I'm applying for right now is the Echoing Green Fellowship. So I'm just in the final round at the moment, fingers crossed. But it essentially is an $80,000 grant that's given to you upon entrance of the fellowship. And If you're able to raise, or I guess earn more than $2 million in revenue in the first 5 years, I believe, you pay that $80,000 back. Of course, if I hit that stage, I'd be happy to pay the $80K back, but it's great because it gives you that capital up front and it doesn't have that obligation associated with it.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Sahar. Before we move on, I'd also like to point out that one of the insights that we uncovered was that a lot of women-owned businesses start because there is a need for extra income or additional income to the family. But then the second biggest reason was also the fact that women see a challenge in the community or society that they're in, and they want to create a business that creates a solution towards that. And the businesses usually start with a huge impact focus because they're mostly created to sort of address the issue. And then after is when they start thinking about the financial side of the business. And so it's interesting, again, having the three of you, and your businesses are very impactful as well, addressing some of the challenges that you see in society. So I thought I'd point that out. Annabelle, I ask you the same question on your fundraising journey so far, how you've met investors, how you've raised finance, from where in the structure.
Right. I'll begin by saying it has been rough. We're still in early stage, and I think one of the reasons why we've kind of lingered as an early stage startup is because our main offering is the marketplace, and the classic problem of chicken or egg is what we've been dealing with for the past about year and a half. We didn't want to advertise for clients to come onto the platform when we didn't have a good stock of service providers. So we were very much focused on getting service providers, and good service providers at that, across the country on the platform before we started advertising. So that has kept us quite firmly in early stage for a while. And in addition to that, we're pre-revenue. So you end up ticking a lot of boxes, maybe impact, women founded, and then you get to the revenue box and you're stuck because you can't fiddle with that one. But what we have seen has worked to our advantage is the data that we have. So initially, when we first started having these conversations, we were making a lot of assumptions. We didn't really have much to work with other than the assumptions that we had come in with. Between 2020, July, which is when we launched, and I want to say about August last year, the amount of data that we collected almost surprised us as well, because we're doing quite personal information, and we were surprised that people were willing to offer this information up to a platform that is relatively unknown. But it also validated the need for a platform like ours. And once we were able to make sense of this data and use it for some insights and plug that into our deck, then our response was a lot better from investors. We actually have our very first investor on the panel, Francisco from ANCAP. And I really like the approach that they take. And I think it's an approach that a lot of other people should take, is more data-driven approaches to funding. In general, women not. I think it works to the benefit of women more than others, because there's a lot more bias when you're talking to female founders, unfortunately. So I really like that approach because yes, you can't remove all your bias, but it gets your foot in the door because it removes the first, what's it called? The first impressions that usually make or break this fundraising conversations for most of us. What else? I'd also like to point out that, so we have recoverable grant as well as just normal grants, and are looking to close our pre-seed in the next few months. And it's been interesting that all of these rounds seem to have been women, with women at the helm.
That's very interesting. Are the funds who've invested in you for the grants, are they gender lens funds, or are they commercial funds but with women in leadership?
They're commercial funds with women in leadership.
Very fascinating. Another insight that we also found in our report, that the more gender diverse the fund is, the more funding you see going to a gender diverse portfolio. And as you can hear for the entrepreneurs, there's a lot that goes into fundraising, and there's definitely a gender bias. And so removing that first step opens up so much for entrepreneurs. What an incredible story, Annabelle, and great for you being able to move from Kazi to Ziada and also seeing so much success with it. It's also very interesting comparing the various sectors that we have here today. We have a very women-focused product from Maziwa Breastfeeding. Then we have Annabelle Yu, who's sort of in the fintech and marketplace industry. And then we have Emily, who's coming up next in sanitation and waste to value specifically. So Emily, I'll hand over to you for you to also let us know about your experience on the same.
Great. Yeah, Innovation's a little bit further along the line. So we have to date about 5 million in revenue, and have done a wide range of fundraising from when we first started here in Kenya in 2014. So started with a lot of grants, got into some repayable grants, and very interesting space that we're in is usually this far along, we've yet to close our Series A. COVID came in right as we were closing our first Series A 2 years ago. And so we've had multiple, C++ bridge rounds of trying to get through the COVID, which Annabelle, kudos to you to even starting a company and during COVID times. That's quite difficult. And so we've done the whole gamut of different fundraising. I feel like we've rode the grant train for as long as we could, because we're in a larger stage now of very much growth. It's harder to get grants at the size that we need. We're now starting to go into debt as well as some convertible debt. And then hopefully with our Series A raise, which we're working on closing this summer, we'll actually have our first official equity, which is exciting. I think to your point that the biggest thing I've seen is that when it's come to investing, and the people who are leading those investing, the portfolio managers, 95% of who we dealt with has been men. There has been a lot more, I think, on the grant or repayable debt that has been more female, but almost exclusively male portfolio investors for investing. And that's intimidating. I think it also becomes difficult, even finding appropriate times to meet with them, that I've seen my co-founder not have to worry about as much. Okay, you're at a conference and they can only meet at 10 p.m. for drinks. It's not weird for a male and male to meet. It adds some different levels for a female. And so I think that's been some of the interesting differences along our growth. I'll just keep going in because I think it's good to dive into some of these. The other thing that I've seen a lot is, having a male and a female co-founder is when we meet with a potential investor, I'm always surprised at just the way that the, mind you, male investor, they tend to just, even their body language, face my male co-founder and address every question to him. So I run operations, he does run more of the fundraising. And so he tends to have those relationships, but it'll be a question operation. And my co-founder will be like, oh, ask Emily, I'll answer. And then the follow-up question, they'll respond again to my co-founder. And it's this weird dynamic where you're like, hey, I know what I'm talking about as well. And so I think having a male co-founder has probably been really helpful, I think, in the fundraising space for that. And potentially, we've decided that he does more of the fundraising and I run more of the internal ops, but I wonder if in the early days we were pushed that way because of ease.
Well, very interesting insights, Emily. Thank you, all of you ladies, for a very candid conversation about the honest experiences that you've been having. Emily, coming back to you, like you mentioned, you have a male co-founder. What do you feel about how other technical experts or the market views your expertise as well? Some of the challenges we saw were that you go for meetings and it's just like you mentioned, the people that you're talking to feel like you either do not know what you're saying or you're not basically the founder, you're maybe, someone else in the team. So what do you feel about your expertise right now, having grown for a while here in Kenya and having established yourself in the market more? Do you think that it changes?
Yeah, I mean, it forces, I think, the women in the space, myself included, to have a much stronger backbone of defending ourselves. And that's the way I feel like. If I'm the first one meeting not only investors, a lot of times investors, but a potential partner, and they're all men, I really feel like it's this defensive thing where I have to prove myself to a certain level before they talk to me. Whereas opposed, I don't see that as much with my co-founder, who can just casually have a beer with them, and it's not in this defensive standpoint from the beginning. And so I do think, you know, and it's funny, I am the more technical one between us, right? That is what I do. I run operations. I in engineering background, but still having to prove that to these investors and to prove that I know what I'm talking about.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for sharing that. Some key points come up for me around the role of grant funding. And now that we are looking at a lot of innovative structures for this kind of funding, you can look at recoverable grants like you've mentioned and the role that they have in really pushing these businesses, especially at the early stage. There's also the role of women in leadership, in fund leadership, and how it integrates and improves the kind of portfolio that a fund has. And then there's also the gender bias really in the markets, which I know you have conversations often, and while some understand it, others don't, because there's growing entrepreneurship in Kenya, there's growing entrepreneurship in the world. And so the argument is always, well, if there's growing entrepreneurship, then how can there be a gender bias? But really there is, and a lot of the founders continue to face it. And imagine how far women-owned or gender-inclusive businesses would be able to grow if, you know, some of these barriers were removed right from the beginning. Now, my last question, and I'm really over time, but I have to ask it because I want to make this a promotion platform. I'll give all of you 2 minutes. Like Emily, I know you're fundraising now, slightly larger ticket size. Annabelle, you fundraised and probably are fundraising as well as Sahar. What is your fundraising ticket size right now? And what's the most innovative structure that would be most useful for your business? Mouthful, but I'm sure you've thought about it. So 2 minutes each.
I think I can go first because we're doing pre-seed, and I think it's less complicated when you're in the pre-seed stage. So ticket size is about 500. It's also interesting to note how this ticket sizes are getting bigger and bigger. Like people are raising millions for pre-seed nowadays, and you look at your numbers, and sometimes you ask yourself, like, what is there like an expense that I'm missing or something? So yeah, we're doing 500 and hoping to do like probably a safe. We're still early, so that's the direction that we're looking for.
Great, Annabelle, don't worry. Small ticket size are absolutely what we should be doing. And I think the longer you can go without taking large amounts of equity, the better. So keep on that track. So we're looking to close the raise. Our total Series A will be about 5 million. So looking for ticket sizes, probably $500,000 to $1 million size. We are marching forward with a lead investor right now, a potential one, but it's always good to have other leads that you're starting conversations with in case it doesn't close the way you want it to. So we're still looking for leads as well as people who would want to tag along with someone else. As far as structure, equity will be the main one, but we're also looking at some debt because we do build large scale infrastructure for waste treatment plants. And so also looking into debt potential for a specific infrastructure project.
Great. So as a hybrid, we're basically constantly fundraising, and we're looking for 250,000 right now. And that's to support our launch in Kenya and continue to invest in the growth here, as well as to expand into new markets. So we just recently launched in South Africa in January and are looking at a few other East African markets as well. And we're looking for primarily working capital loans for inventory because there's a working capital leg inherent in our business model, and then revenue sharing agreements. So looking at various options for rev share since we're starting to generate revenue there. Not raising equity at the moment, just given our structure makes it a little bit complicated, but might consider that in the longer term.
Great. Thank you so much, ladies. What an amazing conversation we just had. I actually wish we had more time. I had so many other questions I wanted to deep dive into, but hopefully the next time we'll be able to chat more. And for the audience, I hope you can reach out to them on their various asks in any offers you might have, or to even get to learn more about the businesses. At this point, I will hand over to Charlotte, who will introduce the next segments. Thank you so much, ladies.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Brilliant to have such an exciting and varied range of businesses in different stages and to learn more from your experience. And thanks for all your candor as well. So in this next section, if Niharika, we can jump a couple of slides. We have a discussion with global and local gender lens investors to understand how they are innovating across the investment process to integrate gender lens investing strategies, instruments, and processes. So we're hoping with these three very disruptive and innovative investors, we can answer some of those challenges that we've just heard from the entrepreneurs. Let me briefly introduce the panel before asking you all a few questions. We have Adidana Shabir, Regional Director of Africa and the Middle East at Village Capital. As Regional Director, Adidana oversees the growth, health, and expansion of the organization's work and teams in these regions. She's particularly passionate about further leveraging the organization's learnings to better support locally founded and led businesses and intermediaries. Adidana has had an exciting career working with African entrepreneurs. She previously worked with the African Leadership Network, a community of the continent's young, dynamic, and influential leaders. Next, we have Yemi Kerry, co-founder of Rising Tide Africa. Rising Tide Africa's movement is a women's movement initiated with a vision to increase women's participation in angel investing as an asset class and promote education, cross-border investing, and investor mentoring across Africa. She's a director of the Lagos Angel Network and serves on the board of Africa Business Angel Network, as well as the investment committee of the Acumen Resilient Agricultural Fund, managed by Acumen Capital Partners. And finally, last but not least, we have Franziska Ray, CEO and co-founder of Unconventional Capital. Franziska started her career in commercial banking at Deutsche Bank before moving into consulting with Accenture Strategy and Sustainability. Since 2019, Franziska has been the CEO and co-founder of UNCAP, a fintech revolutionizing access to funding for early-stage entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa. UNCAP raised an undisclosed 7-figure funding round to test its data-driven, automated, and remote investment platform, and has so far invested in 27 entrepreneurs in 8 different countries. Over the next 10 years, UNCAP wants to invest $1 billion in 50,000 entrepreneurs. We're so excited to have these 3 investors who are each deploying different but innovative methods to address gender bias and gender issues across the investment processes. But first, I'd love to hear a bit more from all of you. So starting with Adidana and then moving to Yemi and then Franziska, please can you give us a brief overview of your fund's history, investment thesis, and focus?
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. Village Capital was founded in 2009, and the ethos of the organization from then and still is to this day, democratizing entrepreneurship. And so the tactic that Village Capital has used, which is quite unique among funds and which has led to great gender diversity within the portfolio, is peer selection. So our organization, we have 2 organizations effectively. We have a nonprofit which runs programs that trains entrepreneurs and helps them view their businesses as if they are investors, so through the lens of investment readiness. And then we have a fund as well. And so what happened for the first 10 years of our existence, or 12, I should say, is that the nonprofit ran accelerator programs, and then the cohorts were empowered to select among themselves who should receive investment from either VilCap Investments, the fund, or from another fund who by chance participated as a partner in that program. And so typically in the United States, the average for gender diversity of a portfolio is 15% female-led companies. But by giving the decision-making power to entrepreneurs, VilCap Investments portfolio is comprised of roughly 45% female founders. So by eliminating the decision-making on our end and giving that power to entrepreneurs who have both lived experience with the problem, lived experience with building a business within the sector in question, the gender diversity increased on the average 3 times. So that's something that we have found as important and something that we have prioritized. And typically we are investing in impact sectors, so energy, education, fintech, healthcare, and the like. So not too dissimilar from what others have done. We're participating here on the panel today. And so I would say that for us, eliminating us and getting us out of the decision-making process is what contributed to gender diversity in our fund.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adedana. And looking forward to jumping a bit more into the peer selection process, because this is a really exciting innovation in the market with evident impact and effect from a gender perspective. Yemi, over to you. It'd be great to hear a bit more about your fund's history, investment thesis, and focus.
Okay, we are a group of female angel investors, and what we do is to try and increase women's participation in angel investing, primarily because we think that women understand better what the female entrepreneurs are going through. The other thing is that the more women that become angel investors, the more we are going to be able to address the gender gap issues. We actually do drive on 4 different pillars that addresses some of the issues and challenges that the female entrepreneurs see. The first one is about the networking. So we try and create an environment where the entrepreneurs will have peer networking together, as well as an environment where the entrepreneurs can meet up with the investors. We find that the women, when they have the opportunity to network together and build their own network, they gather more intelligence, whether it's for their own businesses or about what is going on in the ecosystem. So we try and create those kinds of environments. The second thing that we do, and we do a lot, is mentoring. With our mentoring pillar, we have sectionalized what we do into just one-offs, just to show that if you are looking for mentors, these women are available. The mentors are from within the Rising Tide network. And then we also, so we have that as a mentoring clinic. And then we also, do a lot of mentoring for our portfolio companies, because from going from one phase to other, they do need handholding in certain aspects of the growth of their businesses. So we do that. And then we do some sort of mentoring for those that come to us and we feel that they're not investment ready. We mentor them and try and get them investment ready and invest in them. The third pillar that we operate upon is the education pillar. For the education pillar, we educate a lot of our investors. The member investors are sometimes very new to the environment, to the ecosystem. They don't understand the concept of angel investing. They're doing this as in a trust kind of situation because of the person that referred them, or they find out that there is this kind of opportunity that is around and they would like to participate in and see whether they can add this to their own personal investment. So we do a lot of education for our investors so that they can understand how to invest, what to invest in, and how to see the different startups that come in. The third thing that we do under education is the second thing is the entrepreneurs education. We have developed an accelerator education curriculum now. It's going to be online in another 3 weeks. And it is a very practical one because we found out that while we're doing master classes, there were some gaps that people really needed to practice for themselves. So when you're doing your valuation, for instance, the different methods, and then you can do the practical work on how to value your own businesses. At the end of the 5 weeks acceleration education program, you come out with your own particular businesses fact findings, and also maybe what you might want to call a business plan. Because by going through all of the ethnic governance, different topics, you would then have answered a certain number of questions that you would otherwise not have done. And the third pillar is that of investments. In our investments, the fourth pillar is that of our investments. In our investments pillar, we have evolved over the last 4 years, and sort of stabilized in having 2 deal days per year. But every month we listen to pitches. Every day we receive pitches from direct or indirect sources, and we filter it against our investment philosophy. And one of the things that we do to encourage the women to really generally invest is to allow them to choose and select the kind of investments that they want to make. So we are now 70 members in Rising Tide, and averagely we have in the last year, 2021, we had an average of 11 members investing in one deal. So the ticket size has moved from about 25,000, where we were very few, to now getting into an average of $50,000. The largest one we have done is about $289,000 in one deal, and that was because a number of members were interested. We want them to be able to be confident in investing in these entrepreneurs and select areas and deals that they understand for their own investments. In terms of our investment strategy, we look at gender lens, so it's female found and or led businesses, gender diverse teams and management. And more recently, we have now included deals that will serve the larger purpose for of services that will be used by the majority of women. So we've included that because we're seeing a lot of these types of deals, and that would help the female women, and we thought, not to leave it out. Our geographies, we started in Nigeria, but we have invested in deals in Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Senegal, I think. Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Senegal. We have members across the continent, so we predominantly work virtually, and then more recently we've begun to meet physically because members have been working together over the last 2-3 years without knowing each other. We are sector agnostic, and we have we look for high impact sectors, including health, education, agriculture, financial inclusion, and those are areas of particular interest. But all portfolio companies will be tech focused or tech enabled, because we believe that with tech that you would be able to pretty much scale your business, and then it gives you flexibility of changing your revenue models. When we look at our investments, our considerations are mainly whether the company has traction or prospects, and then look at the addressable market, because we're looking at Africa, and then whether they're able to scale and expand into Africa. And we really concentrate on the teams, as well as if we have an exit strategy. Talking about exit strategy, we have begun to, this is our 4th year, and we've begun to look for those deals that will enable us exit. And we are seeing more that we might have to then do secondary look for secondary people that want to the secondary market. And so we are now looking at a strategy where we would raise a pool of funds and put in escrow to enable us invest on follow-on rounds for our portfolio companies, such that they can concentrate within that period where they're looking for the 300,000 and the 800,000 on their business and concentrate on growth. In other words, if we are able to give them that pool of funds, it will reduce their time on fundraising, and it will also encourage and enable them grow to the point where they will be attractive to the VCs and the PEs and the other funds. So that is one fund that we're looking at and having this quarter.
Brilliant. Yemi, I'm just going to jump in quickly because looking at time, and but this is really, really interesting, and I'm going to come back to you with some specific questions as well. But I'll hand over quickly to Franziska just to give a bit of an overview of unconventional capital. And as you do, Franziska, I'd be really interested if you could discuss a little bit more and in more depth the innovative approaches you've incorporated into your fund to make it more accessible to women. This is something that's really excited us about working and bringing on all three of you into this session. But it'd be great to hear, Franziska, maybe from Unconventional Capital's experience. How do you feel that these approaches differentiate you from other capital allocators in the market and make you more gender inclusive in particular?
Sure, thank you. And I feel so honored to be in the company of such great women throughout the whole session. So the main reason for UNCAP's existence is inclusion and scale. So when we started UNCAP, we basically, 98% of early stage businesses in Sub-Saharan Africa don't have access to sufficient funding or funding at all. And we really wanted to find a solution where we would be able to provide funding to every good entrepreneur, every good early stage entrepreneur in Sub-Saharan Africa, no matter their background, whom they know, if they're in the right networks, if they went to university or not, if they know how to build a pretty pitch deck. But so really take out all the things that at the moment make it much less inclusive than it could be. And at the same time, we really wanted to be able to reach a scale that you usually only see with microfinance. So really being able to have kind of like a standing offer for early stage entrepreneurs. So as long as you're a good entrepreneur, you will get funding. And so when we started our company, we really built everything we do, our whole solution, completely around the target group. And I think accidentally, by doing that, we were addressing from the challenges we saw earlier in the slides, probably like 80 to 100% of all the challenges that you mentioned is something that we addressed, because we've built something that is completely built around a target group when it comes to selection, when it comes to investment, when it comes to fund structure, etc. So basically what we're doing is we started a fintech with a fully automated remote due diligence. So that means you as a female founder, you don't need to know us. You don't need to network yourself to us. You don't need to be in Nairobi. You don't need to travel. You also don't need to build a pitch deck. And you also don't need to pitch. So many things that I think female founders are struggling with, or founders in general are struggling with, is something that we take out of the equation. So basically you go on the website, you click apply, you go through a fully automated 7-step due diligence process without any human intervention, without us making any of the decisions ourselves. It's purely based on data. And the data we collect, the main goal of the data is to measure if you are a good founder. So there's a very heavy focus on your potential as an entrepreneur, your personality, your skills, your behavior, and a little bit of your financials, but we don't care about your business plan because it will change anyways. So I think that is kind of like the first step where we're really lowering the barrier to apply. And we also make the data that we look at focus much more on the entrepreneur and not certain potential to build a good pitch deck or write a nice business plan that you learned at, I don't know, university or an accelerator or anything. The way we then invest is through an equity-based revenue sharing deal. So again, we also saw the challenge that in general, so our target group is local entrepreneurs only. So you need to have at least the majority of the founding team needs to be local, ending up with many of our entrepreneurs being completely local. And you need the potential to grow over time, but not necessarily to exit your company. So we're not focusing kind of like the high tech, high growth businesses but we're focusing on businesses that can grow. And very often what we also saw early in the slides, that includes a majority of female-owned businesses, because they're just, I think, less founders that want to build the high-tech, high-growth tech unicorn. And so in order to be able to invest in those businesses, we had to make ourselves independent of an exit. Well, at the same time, we also wanted to, we don't want it to require collateral. So we've built something where basically we take an equity stake in the business, but the business is buying it back completely. So enabling entrepreneurs to regain ownership and to buy it back through their revenues. And also, we heard earlier, female-owned businesses tend to have higher revenues because I think they're very often more solid businesses that can grow. So I think the way we invest our deal basically is very prone to be fitting for female entrepreneurs. And I think basically these two things together, and also the ticket size. So we invest between $10,000 to $50,000. And that's also something we heard earlier, like very often the first ticket you need, it's not a 5 million ticket. It's not a 500K ticket. It's probably like a 10 to 50K ticket. And our whole platform is designed in a way where everything we do lowers the cost of an investment to a level where we are actually able to do these small tickets at a profit. So we're like a full profit fintech company trying to deploying these small tickets at scale to as many entrepreneurs as possible over the next years. And I think it's mentioned before, we've done like 27 investments so far. We're also like a very young company. So we're like a founder ourselves. So very often also facing the challenges of a female founder fundraising. We want to do 50 to 100 investments over the next weeks. Those are all already in the pipeline, and then do another 200 investments by the end of the year. And I think so far we're doing quite okay with attracting female founders. So I think we had like about 40% of applicants have at least a female founder in the team, 26% female only, 30 something percent 50-50. But then the number drops a little bit when it comes to the business we shortlisted. So this is something we currently pay close attention to on how to solve that. And at the same time, we still think that the number of female applicants, and especially female-only applicants, is way too low. So it is, especially for this year, our focus is on how can we increase the pipeline of female entrepreneurs applying for funding with us.
Brilliant, Francisca. Really, really interesting, and great to see that so many of the challenges that we outlined in the report resonate, and also that there are actors out there addressing them directly. So really exciting to learn more firsthand about UNCAP. Adidana, I'd love to come back to you and Village Capital, particularly because Village Capital has taken a wide-ranging approach and is constantly using its learnings to innovate. Based on your experience, how do you think that the ecosystem can advance gender lens integration for funds, and what are the core challenges, I suppose, within the investment process that should be addressed?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think the bias that was spoken to so clearly and candidly by entrepreneurs in the last segment is one of the biggest hurdles. We have looked at, so our research, we've done recently some research on gender lens as well. And so we have experience as what peer selection can do, but obviously peer selection is not what many LPs or GPs want to do. So if that's the case, what else is possible? And I would say that we have looked at another piece of the puzzle, which is the acceleration piece, especially because we are a split entity. So what is it that accelerators, incubators, et cetera, can do to help with this problem? And so something that we found that was really interesting, which is that acceleration exacerbates the gender financing gap for raising equity, but it does seem to have a positive impact for female-led startups when they're raising debt. And so it's not to say that acceleration isn't helping women at all when they're trying to raise equity, but it's helping men more. And so I think that does call into account some questions about what types of questions that investors are asking, because often, and this is not just the investment world, I think women are forced to compete on what they've done versus on their vision compared to men. So men are often can speak to their potential and speak to what they want to occur. Whereas women have to defend. And that's just like the natural position of how that conversation starts. And so something that we're currently looking at is strategies to reduce bias by how to change investor behavior in the evaluation process. And so I can't say everything about that right now, but keep an eye out in June because we will release that report. And a note to anybody who is on the call that is an accelerator or incubator or is building some sort of similar entity or knows someone, and considering this is a Sankalp event, there's many people on this call who this applies to. The IFC and ScaleX is live. This program is accepting applications from accelerators across the board, and it's a performance-based program that will provide an award of up to $25,000 to accelerators that are helping women-led companies raise equity financing. So I can post that link when I'm done speaking, but that's something to keep in mind. But obviously, I mean, I think the hand wringing around some of the gender lens issues is the same thing around nationality issues. It's the same thing around racial issues in the US when it comes to funds. At this point, I think it's just do it. I mean, I don't know how many panels we can have, how many conferences we can do. I mean, I've been at Village Capital for almost 5 years, and we've been talking about this for a very long time. So I think at this point, you either want to do it or you don't, because we have all the tools that are necessary to get this done.
Really powerful last words, Adidana, and I'm glad that we have representation here of people who are actively moving forward and changing that the kind of mainstream and moving to address some of those barriers. But I think as we're seeing in the data, it's still behind, and we're still not seeing that gender mainstreaming across investors. But definitely agree. Finally, just my last question to you, Yemi, which also ties into this kind of broader approach that looks more holistically at how we can address gender bias. So we've heard a lot about gender bias in the investment process and the lack of women in leadership and funds from our entrepreneurs. You've intentionally taken a broad approach to address issues experienced by both entrepreneurs and investors. From your experience, what approaches should funds take to address these issues, in addition to the ones we've already heard from the other speakers?
On a broader issue, when Adidana says that these issues can be likened to racism or can be likened to gender issue. The gender issues are there. Deliberate efforts need to be taken. The funds, there is a thin line with you really focusing on giving the women some sort of advantage and also addressing the biases. So you don't want to be seen as creating that sort of opportunity for the women and indirectly saying that they are not up to par in comparison with the men. So there is this thin line that we need to be very careful about. Having said that, I think that whether you're a male founder or a female founder, the focus should be on whatever your product or service is and the competency and capacity of the founders to be able to deliver and whether the opportunity is there. If this approach is taken, I think that a lot of the issues would be addressed. What we see as the biases in gender is when your investors begin to narrow down on the subtle biases of, are you able to manage your home and the business? Those kind of subtle nuances are what creates the biases. But if you are able to par your questioning your processes around the major issues of the project, I think that there will be a reduced bias on women.
Brilliant, Yemi. No, I agree. I think that's one of the key pieces we found is the level of unconscious bias across the different processes. And even, Francisco, to your approach, thinking about unconscious bias within the data that we're using for some more of the technology-enabled solutions to try and be more gender blind. Really fascinating and interesting talking to all three of you, and I wish we could stay here for longer, but sadly time is coming up on us. But it's been a real privilege to have you three here and to speak with you all and learn from all of your experience. So thank you very, very much. I'll now hand over to my colleague Agnes, who's going to launch a couple of polls to hear a bit more from the audience. Over to you, Agnes.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. What an insightful segment we had there. Also really great meeting the amazing women who are also leading the conversation from the other side, on the capital supply side, and leading the change. I'm really glad for the holistic conversation we've had today. Many insights to pick up on structuring and integrating GLI throughout the investment process. And there's so much innovation also to be done. Before it was on the selection of portfolio enterprises. Now we're looking at instruments and integrating GLI on that side. Now we're also looking at peer-to-peer selection, like Village Capital is doing. So there are many different ways, is the biggest point I think that I'm taking home, to be able to continue innovating and reducing some of these gender focused barriers that continue to be in our investment process. Now I think we will move to the poll segment. We'd like to find out from the conversation today, one, which are the biggest financial gaps that are most relatable to you or your business? Alan, if you're ready with those. Okay, this is very interesting. What are the top 3 financial recommendations that relate the most to you? We have lots of votes for blended finance for flexibility, like we heard, especially from the entrepreneurs before. We also have lots of votes on gender-based incentives. And then alternative risk capital instruments. Is it possible to have one person from the audience? You can raise your hand. I wonder if we're able to see that. Just contribute and tell us why they selected what they selected. Rachel, are we able to see anyone raising their hands? Or is
no hand raised so far.
Okay, well, in that case, we'll just move on to the next poll question as we gather our thoughts. What are the top 3 non-financial recommendations that relate the most to you? Gender inclusive capacity building. Very, very interesting. I'd like to hear more about that. What does gender inclusive capacity building mean for you? Is it in form of how the programs are designed? Is it in the delivery of the program? Is it in the content that it has to integrate a gender lens? It would be lovely to hear additional thoughts. Also, please feel free to add this on the chat if you're not open to picking or raising your hand for the microphone. And then we also see advisory to monitor gender impact. And there are various tools in the market on this, which you'll find also included in our report. Technical assistance, skills training, talent acquisition, and sector-specific GLI support. Amazing. Thank you so much for your feedback. If you have additional thoughts on those, please add them to the chat. Just to add more to the point. Charlotte, would you like to take us through the questions? I think we have a few, maybe 5 minutes that we can steal from everyone else's session.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Agnes. I see Janet Ricks, you've got your hand up, so please do take the mic if you've got a question.
Hi. My is not a question, it's just a response to gender capacity building inclusion. Is when you are involved with gender capacity building inclusion, you take into consideration people from different gender, how you can relate to them, integrate them in your program, especially for women, because women are more marginalized, and sometimes being part of activity and being excluded can be the problem. But once you have that issue where you have women participating involving them in decision-making process. It's easier to have them getting knowledgeable so that in terms of competition in the job market or so, they can be competitive with their male counterparts. So that is very, very key and important.
Brilliant, Janet. Thanks so much for sharing, and we totally agree as well. Some interesting reflections there. I see Peace, you mentioned a number of questions in the chat, but feel free to take the mic to ask any of those directly.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Peace. I work with Oxfam in Uganda. I think for me, gender lens capacity development would also look at integrating gender transformative approaches within these kinds of trainings, approaches that would enable men as well as women come together, plan together, work together, make decisions together, jointly, in as far as the different businesses are concerned. One in such an approach, for example, we've used at Oxfam in Uganda, is the Gender Action Learning System, the GIRLS methodology. It's a gender transformative approach that probably a number of you may want to read about. It enables for men and women to come together, plan together, work together, but most importantly, it uses powerful tools or symbols that bring men together, have these discussions together, and women also contribute through within the different processes that they feel are pertinent to them. But also when we talk about gender lens capacity development, I would also move a step further into looking at when we have these capacity building trainings organized, do we tend to probably do an assessment to find out if we organize a training at such a time, will more women as compared to men participate, because we also are cognizant of the different roles that society has gone ahead and assigned to the women within the community. If I organize a training probably at around 1 p.m. or at around midday, and yet this is the time the society expects that the woman should be preparing meals for her household, shall we have more women participating in these kinds of training? So for me, the gender lens capacity development will take on those angles of the gender roles and responsibilities, and also embedding the gender transformative approaches, but also being cognizant that the businesses that the women are engaging in are not those that are going to escalate on the already existing triple role that women have to play within the society. So we need to get into doing a deep analysis in assessing these businesses and be cognizant that they will not add on to the triple role already that the women have to play within the society. Thank you so much.
Brilliant piece, and exciting to hear from Oxfam's experience as well. I think very aligned to some of our thinking with Plan. I see that our session's coming to an end. Before it does, I'd like to really highlight the call to action. So this research is very much the flagship for Plan's work as we design our own gender lens investing strategy with a pilot in Kenya, but looking to have a much more broad and global approach. So we're really interested in getting the insights from investors, entrepreneurs, and intermediaries to shape this and validate this. As a result, we'll be hosting a number of validation sessions to test the areas that we're looking to prioritize and the interventions and solutions that we're looking to prioritize. And we'd love to have as broad a range of individuals supporting us. So Agnes has just posted in the chat a quick forms link. So if anyone would like to contribute or to some of these focus groups and discussion sessions to have their voices heard, please do sign up using the forms link in the chat. And we really hope to hear from you and see you again. I know we haven't had a huge amount of time for questions, but we'll also post our emails in the chat, and please do reach out to us directly if you have anything or would like to follow up. It's been a real pleasure to connect with so many of you today and to have such a brilliant panel of strong women in the sector, entrepreneurs and investors, and we hope to continue the conversation further. Sorry, I was distracted by the chat. So thank you all for attending, and hope to continue the conversation and to have more interventions going forward.
Charlotte, I think there's a question from Irene, or do you respond to that?
Is this the one from Irene?
Yeah.
Yes, the link can be shared with anyone, even not on this call, who it will work for, who'd like to join the conversation rather. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.